Ever wondered what it's like to be secretly married to a powerful tycoon? Buckle up, because I'm about to spill the tea. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single scandalous detail. City at the entrance of a small villa worth $5 million, luggage and clothes were strewn about everywhere. A man and a woman stood in the pouring rain, looking utterly miserable. In the sweltering summer, a heavy rain was supposed to bring infinite coolness to this city. However, tonight, this torrential downpour, to Emily Walker, was like an icy, bone-piercing sword, mercilessly stabbing in her heart. Get lost, and don't stand at the entrance of my house like a pitiful dog. From the balcony on the second floor of the villa, another suitcase was harshly tossed down, coupled with a middle-aged woman's ruthless cursing. The figure standing in the heavy rain raised her head at the sound. She was about 20 years old. She looked at a balcony on the second floor. This villa, which was her home until today, but now she was driven out by the middle-aged woman in front of her. Raindrops hit her chilly cheeks. It was unclear whether it was rain or tears, but her eyes, full of hatred, were stubbornly staring at the woman on the balcony, her once-called second mother. Looking at the sister and brother under the balcony, Elia Parker raised a cold sneer of triumph, and after throwing them a cold glance, she turned and went back into the house. Elia Parker, the 18-year-old Wallace Carter, looked at the woman who turned around and entered the house, his eyes filled with anger. He roared with hate. But what returned to the sister and brother was the increasing merciless heavy rain. Seeing his sister standing in the heavy rain, Wallace hated that he didn't possess millions of assets, and didn't have the ability to protect everything of the Carter family. Emily's gaze always stayed on the balcony. Her cold eyes seemed to have made a silent vow. Her clenched fists plunged her nails into her flesh until she couldn't feel the pain. She swore that she would absolutely take back everything that belonged to her father. Withdrawing her gaze, Emily turned and looked at the luggage thrown in the heavy rain, walked over, crouched on the ground, and packed the already soaked clothes into the suitcase. Wallace also turned around, looking at another suitcase thrown into the middle of the road, and walked over without hesitation. The next second, while Emily was still picking up clothes, she suddenly heard a rushing brake sound piercing through her eardrums. She involuntarily frowned, and when she raised her head, she only saw her little brother being hit and thrown 10 meters away. She lifted her eyes in horror, staring frozenly at the motionless Wallace not far away. For an instant, she felt like everything had stopped. The air around her was pulled away and she felt a numbness in her chest. Watching blankly not far away, Wallace, looking at her brother lying not far away, Emily tried to call out with a trembling voice after a moment. Then she got up in a panic and ran there. Her legs seemed to lose their strength, fell flat on the ground after a few steps, but quickly got up and continued to rush towards her brother, Wallace. An intense pain seemed to tear her chest apart, making her almost unable to breathe. Wallace, Wallace. Emily picked up her brother from the ground, but no matter how much she called, Wallace on the ground still kept his eyes tightly shut. Without any sign of life, she helplessly raised her head, wanting to ask for help from the surrounding people, but when she raised her head, she only saw the perpetrator driving away quickly. Looking around, there was nobody to be seen. Only private cars were still moving one after another in the heavy rain, but not a single car was willing to stop and help them. Due to the accident and the storm, the following cars also gradually slowed down, noticing the car suddenly slowing down, the man in the back seat of a black Bentley slightly raised his head, his brows slightly furrowed, seemingly displeased. "What's the matter?" The driver glanced at his master in the back seat, and then at the helpless man and woman outside the car window, feeling somewhat sympathetic. "Young lord, up ahead." The man faintly shifted his gaze, his indifferent eyes briefly scanning Emily Walker outside the window, then lowering them again, continuing to look at the document he was about to sign. Apparently, everything outside the car window had nothing to do with him. In the pouring rain, Emily sat on the ground, looking down at her little brother in her arms, her heart filled with helplessness and fear at this moment. She raised her head, holding Wallace in the merciless rain, and screamed up at the sky as if to vent all the pain and hatred in her heart, letting the cold raindrops ruthlessly hit her cheeks. 1 month later, "Husband, have you come up with a solution yet?" Inside the living room, Emma Hudson looked at Henry Adams on the sofa with a face full of disappointment and anxiety. Henry took a puff of his cigarette, exhaling a long cloud of smoke, his face full of worry as well. "What can I do? I heard that the CEO of Futurum Group doesn't drink and isn't lustful. What can I do about that?" Upon hearing this, Emma gave a sneer and said, "Not lustful? You think that there's a man in this world who isn't lustful?" In her eyes, all crews under the sun are black and no one is an exception. Even Henry himself, if not for her management, would have long been indulging himself in wine and pleasure. Henry looked at his wife, feeling that she didn't understand anything about men's affairs. Then you tell me, have you heard of any scandals between the young lord and any woman? People say that even when he goes to various entertainment venues, he never calls for women. Understand? How could he possibly be satisfied with the women from those places? You don't even look at the young lord's status. If you send Emily there, I guarantee he won't refuse. Emma blurted out without thinking, as if she had already planned it. Having said that, Emma rolled her eyes confidently, but Henry turned his head in astonishment, looking at her and saying, "What did you say? Send Emily." Hearing his surprised tone, Emma immediately felt unpleased and said bitterly, "What? You can't bear to part with her? She's living in our house for free. Can't she help with this?" 1 month ago, Emily, who had nowhere to go and no home to return to, had to temporarily move in with her uncle's family. She knew her aunt didn't like her, and after her mother passed away, if it wasn't for the business dealings between them, her father might not even have any contact with her uncle. Because of their business connection and because her family was much wealthier than her uncle's, Henry was naturally very close to his niece. However, his wife was another story. She liked Emily's family's previous condition, not her niece. Henry sighed. It's not a matter of helping or not helping. Emily is only 20 years old. She's still a college student. If Emily were really sent to the CEO of Futurin Group, wouldn't that be harming her? Would college student? She's already dropped out of school. Now she's just a working girl. Do you still think she's Miss Rich from the Carter family? Emma said unhappily. Initially, she didn't agree to let Emily live with him. If it wasn't for Henry, she would have kicked Emily out long ago. Anyway, Emily is still a child. How can we do this to her and face my deceased sister? Thinking of Emily's mother who passed away years ago from illness, Henry Adams felt somewhat melancholic. After all, she was his own niece, and he was a little reluctant to do this. Your sister is no longer in this world. Do you care more about your niece or me and your children? Emma Hudson became angrier as she thought about the husband who always protected an outsider over his own family. Was Emily more important than her own family? Henry Adams was helpless, and for a moment, he was indecisive. Their family was on the verge of bankruptcy. If they could get close to the young lord and receive support from Futurin Group, perhaps the Adams family could revive. Just think about it. If Emily is really favored by the young lord, then we might be able to afford Wallace's surgery. Isn't that right? Seeing him wavering, Emma Hudson immediately added fuel to the fire. Hearing this, Henry Adams looked at her. Perhaps this was indeed a perfect solution for both parties. 8:30 p.m. Futurin Hotel, 68th floor, outside the presidential suite. Make way. At the entrance of room 6808, not far away, the young girl glared angrily at two black-dressed men at the doorway. Don't you know who I am? The two men on the receiving end of the glare looked at the girl in front of them and then glanced at each other. In the end, they chose to remain silent. Camilla Walker stared angrily at the two men in front of her. Stepping forward and reaching out with her delicate hand, she physically dragged the bodyguards out of her way and forcefully knocked on the door. Lord Stewart, come out. She had already followed him to this point. That damned Stewart had blocked her entrance to the room. Lady Walker, the young lord is really not in a good mood today. You should come back another day. The room door opened, and a man emerged from inside. Seeing Camilla Walker's furious expression, he knew she was eager to see the young lord, but it was true that the young lord's mood was terrible today. It would be better if they didn't meet. Young Lord Stewart, the legendary character of V-City, with wealth and power to rival nations, and his flawless appearance has women from all over the country vying for his attention. You dare to stop me too? Camilla Walker looked at the man in front of her with arrogance, as if no one in the world is capable of obstructing her path. Just as she was about to explode in anger, the man whispered something in Camilla's ear. Her face changed quickly, and she glanced unwillingly at the man and left the 68th floor. Seeing her finally leave, Clayton Howard breathed a sigh of relief. Inside the room, Baron Stewart impatiently tore off his necktie, his face filled with anger. The raging aura emitting from him was not something anyone would dare to approach casually, as if being on the edge of a volcano, ready to explode. He pulled off his necktie, opened the collar of his white shirt, and turned to walk into the bathroom. He turned on the faucet and let the cold water pour down over his head, as if trying to extinguish the fire in his heart. Half an hour later, Baron Stewart emerged from the bathroom wearing a bathrobe. His face was much calmer than before. Since he went directly into the bathroom before, the lights in the room were not turned on, with only a small table lamp casting a faint glow on the dim room. Through the dim light, Baron Stewart approached the bedside, his brows furrowing slightly, as he felt a hint of displeasure. Who would dare to turn off the lights in his room when everyone knows he doesn't like dimness? Raising his hand to turn on the light in the room, it instantly lit up. Perhaps because he drank too much, his chest felt stuffy, and his mood was extremely irritated. Now he just wanted to lie down on the bed and rest for a while. But just as he was about to sit on the edge of the bed and lift the thin quilt, his hand touched not bedding, but smooth skin. The delicate touch told him that such smooth, soft skin could only belong to a woman. Yet, why would a woman be in his room, let alone on his bed? At this time, the person on the bed seemed to have woken up. Her brows furrowed and she appeared a bit uneasy. Baron Stewart's mood was already terrible today, but for some reason, he suddenly had a lot of patience. He wanted to see how this woman had climbed onto his bed and slept so soundly. Emily Walker furrowed her brows in discomfort and then slowly opened her eyes, her head throbbing. At the moment she opened her eyes, an exceedingly handsome face appeared, and for a moment, sleepy Emily was almost entranced. Indeed, such a good-looking man seemed like something that could only exist in dreams. How could there be such an attractive man in reality? Seeing the woman lying on his bed staring at him, Baron Stewart expressionlessly spoke. "Have you seen enough?" He's talking to her? Those who look good must have nice voices as well. Emily didn't reply. Instead, she slowly extended her fair-skinned arm with a dazed smile, stretched her fingers and gently touched Baron Stewart's stunningly beautiful face. This good-looking man had to be touched to see if he was real. Wow, it felt so good. His skin seemed even smoother than a woman's. Seeing the jade-like hand stretching towards him, Baron Stewart was a bit stunned. In his 28 years, no woman other than his mother had dared to come this close to him, let alone touch him. Grabbing the hand that was wandering randomly on his face, Baron Stewart's expression turned cold, and he asked, "Who sent you?" Emily was startled. The man was talking again, but now his voice was so cold that she felt like she wasn't in a quilt, but on an iceberg. Emily's silence caused Baron Stewart to grip her hand tighter, so tight that she felt pain. This wasn't right. Wasn't this a dream? How could she feel pain? Not going to speak. Baron Stewart's gaze narrowed, staring directly at the woman in front of him. "Say, what?" Emily seemed completely sober now, and looked at the man before her with a hint of fear. She had never seen this man before, and felt an overwhelming pressure from him that made it difficult for her to breathe, especially the inherent noble aura emanating from him. It made her somewhat apprehensive and tense. "Who sent you today?" The young lord had an unusual amount of patience, so he repeated the same question as before. As soon as the words left his mouth, the young lord was slightly stunned. It had never happened before that he would repeat the same words twice. Emily looked puzzled at the man's words and furrowed her brows in confusion, then looked around the unknown room. Following that, Emily was dumbfounded. What kind of place was this? How did she end up here? Emily's eyes widened. She looked back at Baron Stewart. What is this place? And, who are you? Oh my god. Why is she in an unknown room? And there's a strange man sitting by the bed. Hearing this, Baron Stewart squints, finding it interesting that the woman who climbed into his bed is asking him who he is. With a charming smile at the corner of his mouth, he looks at Emily Walker and asks nonchalantly, "You climbed into my bed and you're asking me who I am?" His bed? Emily looks dumbfounded, and then falls into deep thought. She remembers that just before dinner, her aunt was suddenly very nice to her, almost flattering. She was even pouring her wine and making amends. Then she remembers pouring her aunt a cup of wine, and after that, everything is a blur. Could it be? Emily's eyes widen in shock as she looks at the man in front of her. Her uncle mentioned that his company was facing bankruptcy, and the only savior for his company would be the Futurin Group. A few days ago, her uncle even told her that if she could get close to any of the directors from the Futurin Group, his company would be saved. The condition? That she must sell her unsullied body to a stranger. She's only 20 years old. How could she willingly give her body to a stranger, possibly even an old man? Even if she had to do it, it would have to be with the Futurin Group CEO Baron Stewart. Of course, she knows that it's impossible to get close to the young lord. There were even rumors that he never indulged in female company, making her wonder if he was gay. She refused, but what she didn't expect was that her aunt would plot against her. Emily looks at the handsome man in front of her, and then at the unknown room, worrying as she asks Baron Stewart, Are you the master of this room?" He looks at her calmly, his voice deep and steady. Of course, he can't help but scoff inwardly, wondering if playing innocent is every woman's nature. Having eagerly climbed into his bed, she turns around